Okay, so Scott went to a free state. Okay, and Scott also went to a territory, free territory. That is territory that was north of the line 3630. Okay, territory from the Louisiana Purchase that was north of the line 3630. And as a result, since Scott had been, technically had been free when he was in the free state of Illinois, and since he was free in this free territory, he gained his freedom and should be free forevermore. Okay? So that was the argument presented by Scott and his lawyers. Okay? Basically, that once a slave passes over a border into a free territory, that slave is no longer a slave. That slave is a free human being. Okay? So Scott goes to, once he's back in Missouri, goes to the courthouse downtown in St. Louis, sues for his freedom. The case goes back and forth in the courts, and eventually, in the 1850s, the case goes before the U.S. Supreme Court in Washington, D.C. Okay? Highest court in the land. Okay? Now, the Chief Justice of the court, of the U.S. Supreme Court, was a fellow named Roger Taney. Roger Taney. It looks like it's pronounced T. It's actually, but it's actually pronounced Taney. Roger Taney.
Yeah.
Okay?
Who was he, sorry?
And he was the Chief Justice. He was the head justice, the top justice on the U.S. Supreme Court. The court had a total of 9 justices, and he was the top justice on the Supreme Court. Yeah, in Washington. Okay? And the case before the court, and the case before Taney, the question before the court, and the question before Taney was, involved the question, did Scott's time in the free territory north of 3630, and did Scott's time in the free state of Illinois make Scott a free man? That was the question. Okay? That was the question before Taney. That was the question before the Supreme Court. Okay? And the Supreme Court decides by a vote of 7-2 that Scott was still a slave. Okay? The court decides that Scott's time in free territory and that Scott's time in the free state of Illinois had not made him or his family free. Okay? In short, in the Dred Scott decision, the Supreme Court declared that Scott and his family would remain slaves. Now, how did the court reach that decision? Okay, now here's Scott's argument. Okay, now the chief argument for the court was written by Roger Taney, and here's his argument. Okay, here's his argument. He says, okay, first of all, he says Scott has no right to sue. Scott has no right to sue. Taney's argument is that Dred Scott was not a U.S. citizen. Okay? Okay? And why is he not a U.S. citizen? Why isn't he a U.S. citizen? The reason he's not a U.S. citizen is because he's African American. Okay. Taney argues that no African American can be a citizen of the United States. Okay? And here, Taney isn't just talking about slaves, he's also talking about free blacks. He's saying that no one of African descent in the United States can qualify to be a U.S. citizen. Okay? And if you're not a U.S. citizen, Taney argues, you shouldn't have the right to sue in a U.S. court. So what Taney starts off his